Hi, you're on a rock floating in space. That's pretty cool, right? Wait, haven't we done this intro before? You're right, let's fast forward a little. The first bit of Invincible's history is rather chaotic in nature, and as such, most of it doesn't have concrete dates, so for my sake, we will be using rough estimates. Also, we will be using the show's version of events, which as of writing this goes up to the end of season 3, and then afterwards we'll be switching to the comics. So if you're watching this whenever season 4 or whatever the hell comes out, there might be a couple of differences, but it still should be mostly the same. Also, pray for my voice, this script is 62 pages long. We begin with the story of the Viltrumites, which by the way is told differently every single time, so I'm just going to use the most recent one in the comics. Several thousands of years ago, there's this planet called Viltrum, and they seem pretty cool. All of their people have superpowers, and the planet is beautiful. What could go wrong? Well, the race values strength above all else, so they have a culling to get rid of the weak and ensure that only the strongest of the Viltrumites remain. Their leader is this guy called Argal, and some people like him and think he's pretty cool and wise, while others think he is a planet-conquering tyrant, probably because the Viltrumites as a whole were at this point. Anyways, one of these people who doesn't like Argal is this guy Thetis, who defects from the Viltrum Empire. He heads off on his own, forming the Coalition of Planets, a group dedicated to resisting the Viltrumites' tyranny. The next bit of Viltrumite history is pretty rough. The Coalition of Planets designs and unleashes a bioweapon, the Scourge virus, upon Viltrum. It essentially strips the Viltrumites of their power, and puts them into a state that is almost as painful as when a male gets a cold. Around this time, Argal is assassinated by Thetis, creating more unrest amongst the Viltrum Empire. Amidst the spread of the virus, 99.9% of the Viltrumites are wiped out, with some still experiencing the consequences of the virus for a period of time after having it, such as this guy called Conquest, who gets his arm bitten off by a fierce creature called a Ragnar during a period of being weakened. During this period of unrest, Nolan, no last name given, is born. Meanwhile, Argal's true heir was deemed lost amidst the chaos. So they bring in this guy Thrag, a Viltrumite who has basically been bred specifically to be the best of the Viltrumites. He is tasked with finding Argal's heir and ruling over the Viltrumites during his absence. With Thrag in charge, and with the Viltrumites' numbers at an all-time low, they settle on returning to their planet-conquering ways in an attempt to find a species worth conquering and breeding with to restore their numbers. And they do just that, with the Viltrumites leaving a path of absolute destruction wherever they go. However, sometimes the species they find are tougher to crack than they expect, such as the previously mentioned Ragnars, this guy called Space Racer, who we'll talk a little more about in a bit, and the Unopans, a species of aliens that resisted a Viltrumite attack, which left them endangered because the Viltrumites blew all the shit up. The remaining Unopans make breeding camps to try and restore their numbers, as well as make a combatant strong enough to throw hands with the Viltrumite. They later end up catching the attention of, and teaming up with, the Coalition of Planets. Sometime after this breeding program is created, Alan the Alien is born, and is so far the only success of the breeding program. But since he's still too weak to take on a Viltrumite, they decommission the Unopan breeding program. Meanwhile, on Earth, this absolute dweeb gets some powers that make him immortal. During some time in ancient China's history, warlord Feng Cha kills an emperor who places a curse on his family, stating that 7 generations down, he will have a family too big to care for and that it would drive him mad. Fast forward a couple thousand years, and that immortal guy gets assassinated because of course he does, later deciding to join the war effort during World War I. Around this time, Nolan defeats Space Racer in an asteroid belt, trapping him away from his gun that has the ability to shoot through anything, and leaving him for dead with the possibility of returning for the weapon later. Back on Earth, the Immortal officially becomes the Earth's first superhero. This is essentially the part of the broader story that is just origin stories, but most of them don't have concrete dates, so I'm just throwing them in roughly in the order that I think they land. A couple of decades after the Immortal becomes active, Cecil Stedman is doing a sting operation while working for the government, trying to take down this group of supervillains called the Order of the Freeing Fist, but he ends up getting his flesh melted alongside them during the effort to take them down, becoming disfigured in the process in an attempt to keep his humanity or whatever. Later, he ends up working in a mission alongside them to take down the Lizard League. He questions his boss about why those losers were kept around after they tried to nuke a city, to which his boss simply replies that they are too useful to get rid of, so Cecil kills them himself, landing himself a nice prison sentence. Cecil ends up actually bringing some order to the prison, which was intended by his higher-up, using the prison to see if he could take his place as the head of the Global Defense Agency. While Cecil turns his offer down now, he ends up taking it later. Shortly after becoming the head of the GDA, a Viltrumite shows up fighting a monster on some coastline, marking Nolan's arrival on Earth, with him claiming to be from the World Betterment Committee, intent on protecting Earth with orders from Viltrum, which the GDA quickly realizes is a lie. But with Cecil's whole thing of learning to rehabilitate people who may be less than noble, he welcomes in Nolan so long as he actually does want to protect the planet for the time being. Nolan then meets Debbie while doing superhero work. A couple of years later, they get married and have a kid named Mark Grayson, and Nolan learns a bit about the joys of being human while Mark is growing up. Rex Sloan is bought from a poverty-ridden family by the US government, and given the abilities of Killer Queen from JoJo's, as well as some some pretty impressive martial arts training, turning him into Rexplode. Too bad his family immediately replaces him after he gets bought out. Oh hey look, remember that warlord that got the curse placed on him? It's 7 generations later, which means that Kate and Paul Cha are born to distant relatives of Feng Cha, and after a couple of years, they start multiplying endlessly, driving their father mad and winding up with him being placed in a psych ward, with Kate and Paul becoming wards of the government. Kate would go on to join the teen team, but Paul would join the shady, powerful organization called the Order. Elsewhere, this guy, Dr. Brandyworth, gets tasked by the Pentagon to make a biological superweapon. So he does so by turning this lady's baby into a superhero while it's still in the womb, giving her the abilities to see and understand things at a molecular level and manipulate them to her will, with the exceptions of animals and humans. Her mom seemingly dies, and Brandyworth places her with Adam and Betsy Wilkins, who end up raising her, though her dad is a bit of a shithead. She eventually discovers that she has powers and meets Dr. Brandyworth herself, only to get discovered by the government, who kinda wants her back. So they send her replacements after her, but they're all pretty shitty and they disintegrate immediately. She gets abducted shortly after, and after witnessing the death of Dr. Brandyworth and her biological mom, who had secretly been kept alive, the trauma of the event allows her to override her restrictions, altering the memories of the government agents to forget her permanently, healing her body in the process. She then leaves the facility and starts doing superhero work, meeting Rexplode and dating him in the process. Amanda, no last name given, gets caught freaking it by an evil witch grandmother, who promptly puts a curse on her which allows her to turn into a Hulk-like being, but at the cost of aging in reverse every time she does so. It's also worth noting that with her reverse aging, her powers become stronger. Nolan tells Mark about Viltrum, this all-perfect utopia that helps other planets out of the goodness of their heart, informing Mark that he will one day get powers of his very own. And though the efforts of Duct Tape Man are noble, they are short-lived, as he hopes to get actual powers one day. Now, fast forward a little over a decade, and his dad is saving the president from the Mahler twins with the help of the Guardians of the Globe while he's taking a shit. Trust me, that's kind of an important plotline. And Mark still doesn't have powers. He's pretty bummed about this, but it's okay, because he gets his powers later that day while working at his shitty burger job, which kinda sorta accidentally results in the death of some rando in London. Anyways, he tells his dad that his powers came in, which gets a rather strange reaction, but that shouldn't be that big of a deal. During the following days, he catches the attention of Amber Bennett and goes out flying and training with his dad before meeting the superhero tailor of the world, Art, giving himself the name after some mid-superhero work and a little inspiration from his dad. Life is good for Mark, and it will only get better. Hold up, I got a phone call incoming. What's that? Oh, okay. Nolan killed the Guardians of the Globe. Like, hard. But they did a pretty decent number on him, so he faints at the scene. The GDA comes in and cleans up the crime scene, with Nolan being hospitalized. Mark takes it upon himself to do some life-saving in his father's stead. The Flaxons are invading. Who are the Flaxons? They're these rather lame alien dudes whose home has a faster time than Earth, so they age super fast. Mark kinda does nothing here, but we get introduced to the teen team, which is mostly made up those dudes whose backstory I gave earlier, plus this guy named Robot. Thankfully, the Flaxons have the integrity of a paper straw and fuck off as soon as they start drying out. Mark accidentally cripples an old lady, but hey, it's okay, cause Adam Eve is here, and he meets her at his school later because she basically does zero work in hiding her identity. Meanwhile, this demon guy, Darkblood, is investigating the murders of the Guardians separately. Bad news, the Flaxons are back, this time with anti-aging wristbands that are hip and cool with the kids these days. This one Flaxon that Mark disfigured tries murdering him, but thanks to the powers of Adam Eve-induced Rage Boner, he cauterizes them and helps get their weakness discovered. The Flaxons are repelled once again, and we check back with Nolan, who is okay for the time being, but is tweaking over his costume, which is rather interesting. Cecil later comes to the Grayson family, bearing a warning of an alien rapidly approaching Earth, but that's okay, it's just Alan the alien. That Unopan guy from earlier, who's doing an evaluation on Urath to see if they are adequately protected. Wait, this is Earth, dipshit. Oh, so Alan fucks off back to Telescria, the home planet of the Coalition of Planets. Omni-Man gets grilled a little more about his involvement with the Guardians' murders, but that has to wait because the Flaxons are back once again, though they easily get defeated because honestly they're kind of fodder. Taking full advantage of this fact, Omni-Man follows them into their portal to do some aura farming in a scene that probably costs $3 of the $5 that they leave for the animation team after the voice actors get their cut. When Nolan gets back, the Guardians' deaths are finally announced. The Guardians had 2 funerals, one public and one private, but Nolan gets interrogated at the private one. Since there are no more Guardians of the Globe, they hold a tryout to make the new one, which ends up consisting of Rexplode, Duplicate, Monster Girl, Robot, Shrinking Ray, and Black Samson. Mark decided not to join just cuz, and Eve decided not to join because Rexplode, who she was still dating at the time, cheated on her with Kate. Mark makes the worst mistake in his life early in the series by getting with Amber, but it's okay because their first date gets interrupted by Doc Seismic. Meanwhile, Nolan took down, but didn't kill, a kaiju, which the GDA decides to hold on to for later. A little later, the Mahler twins escape with the help of Robot, seemingly for the sake of something dubious. Oh, and Darkblood scares the absolute shit out of Debbie, fear-mongering her into suspecting her husband as a murderer. Time passes, and Nolan and Mark accidentally seal away this mummy guy who I can't remember the name of or if he's important anytime soon. Nolan intimidates Darkblood a little, and Robot steals some of Rex's blood. Mark escorts some astronauts to Mars and fucks up his one job by taking a nap. so he has to save the astronauts from the Sequids, a parasitic species with a nasty case of hive mind. But it's okay, because the Martians are already on top of it, as they just decide to kill the astronauts. Mark doesn't like that though, so he saves most of them, with one exception. This one astronaut guy who gets swapped out for a Martian during their escape, with the actual astronaut becoming a host for the Sequids. Darkblood gets sealed with a tip from Nolan, despite knowing that he was the real culprit by this point. We also get to see Robot's real body for the first time. Mark quits his job and decides to help Titan, this one criminal guy from earlier. He wants to break free from his criminal boss, Machine Head, who, by the way, is just the fucking best.
Shut the hell up!
Nolan thinks this is a bad idea, but Debbie thinks that he should worry more about the little guys, so Mark continues to pursue it anyways. Debbie gets tipped off about Nolan's costume that he was tweaking about earlier, and Robot gives Rex's DNA to the Maulers. Invincible goes to confront Machine Head with the help of Titan, promising to be done early enough to make it to a date with Amber, which, come on man. Machine Head has the powers of plot-convenient clairvoyance, so he hires a bunch of goons to stop Invincible, including, but not limited to, 4 absolutely nobody fodder villains, and one of the actual top 5 or top 3 strongest characters in the universe, which is kind of fucking crazy if you think about it. Titan dips, and go figure, Invincible loses. But the new Guardians show up, who also lose in spectacular fashion, though they do end up arresting Machine Head, so it's technically a victory. However, it's only a victory because Battle Beast decided the fight was too boring after nearly killing half of the team. Titan shows back up after betraying literally everybody, promising to make the city a better place. While Mark is hospitalized, the GDA realizes just how fucked they might be in the event of an actual Viltrumite takeover. This guy D.A. Sinclair is abducting people on the campus to make super tech-enhanced soldiers, which Invincible encounters while out and about on a college tour. He saves the day as Invincible, but since Mark was nowhere to be seen, except by William, Amber gets pissed at him and dumps him. Later, while Mark is attempting to communicate with Amber, he gets called away by William because his lover, Rick, has been kidnapped and turned into a pickle. William also gets kidnapped and almost shares the same fate, but Mark shows up and kinda does nothing until the power of turns Rick back into a good guy despite being lobotomized. Cecil and the GDA arrest Sinclair, but they secretly have him make more Reanimen for them in the background since they gave Mark trouble, which, like, what hasn't given Mark trouble up to this point? Also, if Machine Head recruited Battle Beast, what's stopping the GDA from doing so? While this was happening, Debbie confirmed with Art that Nolan was the one who struck first after analyzing his suit. Debbie confronts Nolan about his involvement with the Guardians, and though Nolan tries denying it, it's already over. She leaves to go upstairs, and he punches a hole in the wall, mauling in silence. Meanwhile, at the same time, the Maulers steal the corpse of the Immortal. Nolan tries mansplaining to Debbie unsuccessfully, and seemingly starts his takeover of Earth right then and there. Don't worry, Debbie is safe. After arriving home from their college trip, Mark tries explaining to Amber that he is invincible, which she has already realized by now because duh. But the ensuing speech was just kind of fuel for like 2/3 of the fanbase to hate her, so they remain broken up for now. Meanwhile, Robot goes to pick up his new body from the Maulers, stealing the body of a teenage Rex for the sake of rizzing up Monster Girl, which is just a little weird. It's also worth noting that while Nolan starts making an effort to take over the world in this episode, there are a bunch of small cracks in his tough guy Viltrumite facade throughout it. A double standard here, a hesitation there. It's good shit. Nolan returns to his house and kills the GDA soldiers who were stationed there, but one of them completely sells and gets Donald killed in the process. After aura farming with William, the GDA decides to nuke Nolan, which he just destroys after getting a nosebleed. Cecil tries talking with him in person one last time, but it's no use, so he sends the Reanimen after him. After he fodderizes them, he sends a buffed version of the kaiju he defeated, which Mark saves him from. Meanwhile, the Immortal gets resurrected by the Maulers, chatting way more shit than he is able to back up. Upon pulling up, he gets low-diffed hard by a distracted Nolan, and afterwards, Nolan tries to indoctrinate Mark by telling him the truth about Viltrum, which isn't a good look. Mark obviously says no, mainly because Nolan talks shit about his mom, and they begin fighting. After aura farming off of some pilots, their fight ends up in Chicago, causing mass destruction throughout the city in mere minutes. Scott Duvall, who was present in the city at the time, witnesses the death of his sister and nephew as Mark tries to save them. After causing the deaths of thousands, Nolan forces their fight to Mount Everest, pummeling his son so hard that the snow gets shaken off of the mountain. After beating his son nearly to death, he has a moment of reflection, succumbing to his human side, after Mark says that even if he has nothing in 500 years like Nolan said he would still have him. Nolan flees the planet, eventually landing on Thraxa, a planet inhabited entirely by bug-like creatures, though that won't come up for a while. The Maulers get rearrested, Mark gets hospitalized and recovers, and Nolan Grayson is officially declared dead for the sake of explaining his absence on Earth. Upon his recovery, Cecil asks him to work under him, as they need a replacement for Omni-Man, but he declines it for now. We also learn of the existence of the White Room here, which will become important later. Back at home, Mark makes the second worst mistake of his life, as he gets back with Amber, who only now sympathizes with him because he got mollywopped by his dad. Alan shows up back to Earth to warn Mark of a Viltrumite threat, to which Mark gives him a big recap of the season. Alan is astonished, as Mark is not only a good Viltrumite, but his dad is a Viltrumite who has abandoned his post, which has literally never happened before. Alan heads back to Telescria, but not before informing Mark that there will be more Viltrumites on Earth soon, and that he needs to be ready. A couple of months pass, and wait, what the hell? The Immortals fighting Mark? And losing, by the way. And Nolan's here, and Mark's on his side.
And we are almost bankrupt. So, time for a cheaper approach. Allow me to introduce the multiverse.
In case it wasn't obvious already, this is an alternate universe, one of many where, instead of the events that we saw transpire, Mark joined his dad in his conquest of Earth. They kill the Immortal, cause duh, and put down a rebellion group hiding nearby, but not before this one guy gets teleported away. That one guy is Angstrom Levy, a man who can teleport to alternate dimensions, who has set himself upon creating world peace in all universes by teaming up with the Maulers in order to make himself a super conduit for all knowledge across alternate universes with the help of his other selves. And it's actually a pretty good plan. Meanwhile, let's see how Invincible's been doing after his dad left the planet. Oh, fuck. He's listening to Radiohead. This can't be good. Him and Debbie are still very obviously healing in a life post-Chicago, but it's still very clearly a long and ongoing process, with the both of them still having wounds from that fateful day. Despite previously declining Cecil's offer to work for the government, he takes it now as a way to distract himself from having to do introspection. Cecil sends him to take care of the Mauler twins, who must be up to no good, except, Mark is kinda inadvertently responsible for fucking up world peace on a multiversal level. Actually, if we're being technical, it's Levy's fault, who declares that he won't start his utopia on blood, while also killing 99% of the people present in the building after watching the Maulers gang on Mark. What remains of Angstrom is a jumbled mess of thoughts and hatred for Invincible, as all of the other Angstrom's memories coagulate into deep longing for revenge, since Invincible pretty much negatively impacted most other versions of Levy. Also, Debbie sees Donald alive, somehow. Mark graduates, and that Martian who replaced the astronaut guy way earlier is now a superhero known as Shapesmith, a Martian who thinks he's way better at being a human than he actually is. That's okay though, cause Mars fucking sucks, and now there's a ship full of Sequids intent on violating Mother Earth. Elsewhere, Darkwing's apprentice is killing people, so Mark tells him to knock that shit off. While we're dealing with the old Guardian's baggage, Mark has to make a YouTube apology on behalf of his dad to Atlantis, which kinda results in nothing, except for a noteworthy weakness of Viltrumites in the form of high-pitched frequencies. Oh, and the Immortal grooms Kate as a part of his new leadership term under the current Guardians. Mark is now an 18-year-old and is in college, and to celebrate, Mark and Amber decide to, hey, I think we're getting a
News.
flash. Oh my god, it's Alan the Alien Power Hour. After reporting back to Thetis about Mark and Nolan, he gets fodderized by 3 Viltrumites, which kinda sucks. After being taken back to Telescria, Thetis turns off Alan's life support, which isn't very nice. Debbie gets kicked out of her support group for exposing that she was Omni-Man's husband, which doesn't exactly roll well when you're in a room with people whose partners he killed. After Mark and Amber finally chill a little, a Thraxan, disguised as Seance Dog, takes Mark to Thraxa to save the people there from asteroids, which, psych, just isn't true at all. Mark's voluntary abduction was the work of Nolan, who wanted to warn Mark of the incoming Viltrumite danger, as he can't take on more than one Viltrumite by himself. Oh, and Mark now has a half-brother. After a good bit of reluctance, Mark starts to agree, but there's no time to think as the Viltrumites are already here. Mark does save the life of his brother and holds his own surprisingly well against another Viltrumite, but after regrouping with his dad and winning the fight against the other Viltrumites, although they are victorious, they're far too weakened from the chaos to do anything about the incoming Viltrumite ship. General Krieg abducts Nolan, but not before Nolan tells Mark to collect his pages. Krieg informs Mark that Nolan is set to be executed, and that he will be sent back to Earth to conquer it in Nolan's stead. On Earth, Donald discovers that he's a cyborg and struggles with it for a little bit before being informed that it was, in fact, his choice, so he mostly becomes chill with it. After recovering, Mark stays for a couple of months to help the Thraxans rebuild, before departing with his brother at the behest of Kim Wexler. Mark shows up back on Earth, leaving the baby with Debbie, before deciding to catch up with Amber. Rex also shows some pretty cool character development after Eve has a monumental fuck-up. Cecil ends up splitting the Guardians in two, with half of them being stationed on Earth just in case, and the other half, plus Mark and Eve, being sent to deal with the incoming Sequids. The space group have a very narrow victory against the Sequids, and end up rescuing the actual astronaut who got stranded on Mars, though the Sequids are still around, which angers me greatly. Meanwhile, the Earth Squad gets high-diffed by the fucking Lizard League, which is kinda embarrassing. But it's okay, because Rex locks in with the power of brain damage. However, during the process, Shrinking Ray gets like super hospitalized alongside Rex, and Kate dies in the process. They have a funeral for Kate a couple of days afterwards, but who cares about something silly like that? Rex and Ray are okay for the time being. Good news, Mark and Amber's relationship is seemingly on the rocks, with their lives being so different. Bad news, she's kind of improving a lot as a character, and it makes me feel just the slightest bit bad. Let's switch to something good. Rick is back. The GDA mostly repaired him, though he has some robo-trauma, so Donald trauma bonds with him about the both of them being cyborgs. Debbie also hires a nanny for Oliver, the purple kid. Mark actually does collect Nolan's pages and learns of the existence of the Ragnars and Space Racer, which is good news because Alan actually recovered from his life support being off and is on his way back to Earth. Right before he left though, Thetis outed himself as a Viltrumite to Alan. Upon arriving to Earth, the Immortal pulls up to run fades with Alan before being shooed off with a spray bottle.
You know, on my planet, sock on the door means somebody's fucking.
Alan collects Nolan's pages and leaves for Telescria once more. Amber and Mark attempt to have a nice date and even talk about potential future plans, but unfortunately, a Viltrumite has showed up to check up on Mark's progress with taking over the world, threatening Amber in the process. Mark attempts to stall for time, so he makes the Viltrumite, Anissa, help him kill a kaiju in the ocean, saving a cruise in the process. Unfortunately though, Anissa is still committed to the cause, and engages in combat with Mark upon him refusing to take over the Earth. She kinda like super solos Mark, but spares him when he calls her bluff about killing him. Before departing though, she warns of a far crueler Viltrumite tasked with checking up on his progress, and tells Mark that, should there be no progress made up to that point, the whole planet will pay the price. Reeling from the event, Mark and Amber break up, agreeing that though they may have tried their best, their worlds are simply far too different for each other to inhabit. Shortly afterwards, Mark gets a call from Angstrom Levy on his mom's phone, telling him to come home. Anissa encounters Alan while the both of them are on their way back from Earth, and engages him in combat, which Alan just kinda shrugs off. But seeing that this is a golden opportunity, he actually allows himself to be captured to board the ship as a prisoner. Unbeknownst to him yet, Nolan is on that very ship recovering his strength before he is set to be executed. Upon returning home, Levy sends Mark through a myriad of dimensions, all while holding the Grayson family hostage, with the intent of softening him up for the real battle. Although Levy experiences a slight identity crisis due to his split memories, he still settles on killing Invincible himself, breaking Debbie's arm in a scuffle after she attempts to fight back. When Invincible is actually given the opportunity, he jumps Levy, almost instantly overpowering him. But being caught up in his whole holding back until the last moment shtick, he lets Levy get a couple of good hits in, before he simply overwhelms him in sheer strength. He lands blow after blow, eventually ending in what can be presumed to be Levy's death, proclaiming, "I thought you were stronger." He wanders around in the desolate dimension that Levy stranded him in, trying desperately to justify Levy's death to himself, before realizing that he is in fact stuck. That is, until this dimension's Guardians of the Globe arrive from the future, stating that Mark's battle with Levy and subsequent disappearance resulted in a rather bad outcome for the future. So they offer to send him back to the present as to preserve the future. Before stepping through the portal, however, Adam Eve pleads with Mark to just tell the present Eve if he has feelings for her or not, as even 20 years later, she's still stuck in the past by what could have been. After he leaves, the future robot lectures her about messing up time, to which she refers to him by the name Rex in her rebuttal. Around this time, a nearly dead Levy slithers into a portal, meeting with the Technicians, a group of interdimensional beings that previously enhanced his strength. They fix him for now, though clearly with dubious intentions, and thus Levy begins scheming again in the background. Back on our Invincible's Earth, they rebuild Debbie's house, and seemingly all is good, but Mark and Debbie are once again very clearly not okay, with both of them recovering from the bombshell of being unsafe in their home once again. Mark drops out of college and talks with Eve alone, but with the wounds still being fresh, he's unable to talk to Eve about his experiences with future Eve yet. Did all that sound cool? Yeah? Well, here's something that's fucking lame. Kate's alive. Yeah, she hid a clone away in isolation for safety purposes, which sounds smart on paper and makes sense, but like, it's kinda crazy that all of the deaths that were caused by the Lizard League were undone. I know it's common for superhero media, but whatever. On the Viltrumite ship, Alan and Nolan seem to have started some semblance of a friendship, and although Nolan still feels an immense amount of guilt, he's vulnerable enough to declare to Alan that he thinks he misses his wife. Fast forward 3 months and Mark is on the grind set, working out, lifting heavy shit, you know, the whole shebang, with the GDA estimating that he is 138% stronger, and might actually be able to take on Anissa should she return to Earth, which by the way is a complete fucking lie. However, the looming threat of an even stronger Viltrumite lurks in the back of their minds. Getting back to work, Invincible and Rexplode go to stop Dropkick and Fightmaster, a pair of twins from the future, from stealing the Declaration of Independence. Their fight gets third-partied by Multipol, who has showed up out of nowhere, attempting to kill Rex as revenge for Kate's death. Except, Kate shows that she's alive. But in typical bum fashion, she doesn't reveal herself before the Declaration of Independence is successfully stolen. Paul gets thrown back in prison, and holy wow, Invincible fumbles Adam Eve. Luckily, Cecil bails him out by informing him that he and Adam Eve are the only superheroes left in America, as the rest of them were kidnapped by fucking Doc Seismic. Honestly, this whole scene is like super embarrassing. They should all be ashamed of getting kidnapped by rock people. Luckily, they get bailed out by Darkwing 2, who Cecil had recruited, as well as the Reaniman, to which Invincible has a kinda sorta maybe valid crash out. He tries debating with Cecil, but pushes his luck just a tad bit too far when he slaughters the rest of the Reaniman that Cecil lets him see. Cecil attacks him with a bunch more Reaniman, and also with a high-pitched frequency implanted in his head. So he flees to the Guardians of the Globe headquarters. Most of the reasonable Guardians take his side after a rather bad display from Cecil, and although Cecil tries to assert himself as the one in charge, Mark steps up and basically tells him to fuck off while threatening his life. Mark asks Robot to get the thing out of his head, to which he obliges. A little later, the Guardians disband over disagreements about how Cecil handled Mark, with Robot even remarking that one day he may need Invincible on his side. Thankfully though, love is in the air, as Debbie gets with her coworker Paul, and Mark ends up getting with Eve finally. This fodder villain couple gets stopped by Mark and Oliver, and during the fallout of the Guardians breakup, those who left move into the old teen team headquarters. Mark decides to take Oliver to get his first costume, which is kind of really fucking ugly.
That shit's ass, bro.
But it's okay, because Mark gets the blue suit, a suit of fortune, power, and one that ensures that only good things happen to him while he's wearing it. During a mission later, the Guardians get fodderized by the Maulers with a taser, including Invincible, so Oliver shows up and straight up kills them, even the Mauler who was surrendering. What follows is proof that that damn babysitter needs to be fired, because during the debate afterwards, Oliver is talking and bordering on eugenics, which I don't think I have to point out isn't very good. Later at home, Mark spots a drone outside his window that had previously been following his moves, so he attempts to catch it, but it self-destructs upon being caught, giving us our first glimpse of Levy since what happened. He takes it to Robot for investigation, but he can't find out who made it, stating that it is very advanced. So Mark goes to the Pentagon thinking that it's Cecil, but Cecil says it also isn't his, so he just kind of fucks off for now. He goes on a date with Eve in Paris, which seems to go well, but is interrupted by Dropkick and Fightmaster, those dudes that stole the Declaration of Independence, who ask him to come to their future and stop their king, to which he very hesitantly agrees. In the future, their king, the Immortal, has slaughtered millions and nuked cities all because he threw a tantrum over being left as the ruler of Earth. He's surprised to see Mark though, pointing out that he looks skinnier than when he last saw him. But after a bit, he just starts blaming Invincible for all of his own shitty leading skills, stating that Mark put him in charge before leaving the Earth with his family, begging him to kill him. Mark says no, so the Immortal threatens to kill Dropkick and Fightmaster, and after a bit of a scuffle, Mark finally puts him out of his misery. He returns back to his time with the Declaration of Independence, right at the moment that he had initially left from. He tells her what happened in the future and apologizes for ruining their date, but Eve is goated, so they return the Declaration of Independence and go on a tour of the world for the rest of the day together. They arrive back at home and immediately start being freaky, so we cut back to the goat, Alan the Alien, who helps Nolan escape his execution with the help of Battle Beast. After escaping the ship, Nolan informs Alan that there are less than 50 pure-blooded Viltrumites left in the universe, and joins the cause for the Coalition, with the two of them being prison buddies now. Mark and Eve are not slick, so everybody in that house knows what they did, so they try to make some money to move out by starting a superhero for hire business. Meanwhile, Titan has been planning to break Paul out of prison for the Order, and tries to recruit Invincible, but he says no. He also visits Machine Head in prison, but he just tells him to go along with whatever his boss wants. Titan's boss, this evil dragon guy, is displeased, so he tries to kill Titan before going to break Paul out of prison himself. Though Eve attempts to contain Paul, he escapes, which means that later down the line we'll probably see way more of Multi-Paul than we see in the comics, as he's not really important past this point there. Mark also kinda gets fodderized by the dragon, but his actual body is only protected by one dude, so Machine Head, fresh out of prison with the help of Isotope, pulls up and old yellers Mr. Liu. Except he still ends up living, so whatever. It also probably means that Machine Head will be way more important in the show than he is in the comics, as he is also really not there after his first encounter. Later, Eve and Mark just settle on being content with what they have right now, ditching their plans to buy a place for themselves. The guy who watched his sister and niece die in Chicago, Scott Duvall, has been stealing these energy storing discs to boost the energy storing powers that he already has. He uses these to attempt to challenge Invincible, attempting to kill him, but it doesn't really work because he just ignores it. Later, he uses his wife and daughter as props to stage a hostage situation, which Mark actually pulls up for this time after being tipped off by Donald. And after a bit of not being able to do anything, he tries to fling Scott into the distance with enough time to save the hostages, but Scott's wife refuses to be saved by him, giving Scott enough time to grab Invincible. Scott uses the Viltrumite kick that he had just hit him with to fry the hell out of him, but unbeknownst to him at the time, the energy leaks off of him and onto his family as well, killing them on accident. He blames this on Invincible as well, but runs out of power and gets arrested, swearing to avenge his family when he gets out. Elsewhere, Rex and Ray have been built up to become a couple throughout the season, even having a couple dates, which is pretty nice. But Ray wants to quit the whatever team this is and settle down for a quiet life, though Rex doesn't agree with this. However, it doesn't seem to kill any romance they have for each other. Robot also makes a belt to prevent Monster Girl from aging backwards with her powers, so that's pretty cool. Unfortunately though, Levy is finally prepared to get his revenge, but for real this time, as the man who hates Invincible more than anything gathers a bunch of evil Invincibles to ruin the life of the good Invincible.
That makes sense to me.
During these 3 days, 18 evil marks invade the planet, destroying landmarks and cities, as well as killing a metric fuck ton of people.
Swearing doesn't make you cool.
Our heroes have various encounters with the Invincibles, with some going better than others. But during the war, Eve gets injured and has to go to the hospital at the Pentagon, being placed in a coma. Powerplex gets to fulfill a little bit of a revenge fantasy. Best Tiger styles on Sinister Mark. Cape Vincible. The actual Guardians of the Globe get completely squad wiped, with Darkwing 2 sacrificing himself to take an Invincible into the Dark Dimension with him. And holy shit, is that Tech Jacket? Anyways, the leftover team of the Guardians are attacked by an evil Mark, who nearly kills them all. But Rex buys enough time for his teammates to escape, and runs out of ammunition to use to detonate. The evil Mark grabs him by the throat, goading him on about how little he has left, before Rex points out that he has one last thing he can blow up, his entire goddamn skeleton, killing the both of them in one last blast just as Ray pulls up to witness it. On the third day, Levy makes his actual appearance, convening with the 8 remaining Marks about the next phase of the plan. The other Marks, though, don't really agree with it, as most of them realize that this war will actually kill them all. And some of them aren't even in the war for the sake of multiversal domination like the actual evil Marks. They threaten to jump Levy, but he just strands them on the planet that Invincible nearly killed him on. Our Invincible pulls up to fight Levy and nearly gets stranded himself, before Levy runs out of resources and Mark overpowers him. He almost kills him, but due to Oliver's bitch ass pulling up, he hesitates just long enough for Levy to escape through a portal, but not before taking his arm. Levy is back with the technicians, who basically sentence him to eternal servitude, seeing as he failed his original goals. What follows is a mass cleanup, as several major cities are basically leveled, with the death toll being several hundreds of thousands of people. Powerplex, who is still out and about at this point, pulls up to the cleanup effort and tries to throw hands with Mark. But with the help of Oliver, he just drains his energy and arrests him. During this time, Cecil asks Mark to lead the new Guardians, as the Immortal had retired due to, quote, giving enough to this world. Yeah, sure, bud. Mark turns down this role though, instead deciding to dedicate himself to the cleanup effort. The cleanup is clearly taking its toll on Mark mentally, and just when you think it couldn't get any worse...
Stand ready for my arrival, worm.
This is Conquest, the guy that Anissa was saying was like 10 times worse? Yeah, it's this guy, who has never failed to assimilate a planet before. Mark tries to mog him off, but Conquest's aura is simply too strong, so although Mark initiates the fight, Conquest very quickly proves to be the dominant force. The key difference between him and other Viltrumites is that while he is loyal to the Empire, that isn't his main goal. His main goal is just to throw hands. And he does exactly that, reveling in the sheer thrill of battling someone who is even remotely close to his strength. When it looks like Mark's gonna get his ass beat once again, Oliver goes to try something, which, like, bro. Cecil starts crashing out, as although he had collected some of the alternate Invincible's corpses to be turned into Reanimin, they are not nearly ready yet. Oliver ends up getting crippled for the rest of the fight after being almost torn in half because, you know, duh. And the battlefield gets moved a bit, with Invincible getting absolutely pummeled by Conquest's immense strength. Eve pulls up to the fight and does a lot better than she does in the comics, but still ends up getting donutted anyways. Mark starts mourning her, thinking that she's dead. For good reasons too. But while they're on the floor, Conquest just thanks him for giving him the opportunity to truly cut loose and enjoy the heat of the battle. Mark finally puts his little rage mode into good use, shattering Conquest's prosthetic and tackling him to the floor after biting his shoulder. Conquest turns the tables on Mark, pinning him down and spilling his heart out to him, telling him things that would normally be seen as taboo amongst Viltrumites. He trusts him to take it to his grave. Meanwhile, Eve starts to glow and arise from the floor, as her body's override has activated once more, repairing her body before firing off a large beam of energy at Conquest, frying his front side. Invincible capitalizes on the moment, attempting to beat him further into the ground, though Conquest grabs his unbroken hand and promptly breaks it. Not ready to tap out, Mark starts bashing in his head repeatedly, beating Conquest to a pulp before his face looks like, this. For now, the fighting is over, as Conquest is clearly in no state to fight. Mark drags himself over to Eve, who is laying on the floor peacefully, though she should probably be wearing just a little bit more clothing. The two end up in the hospital, with Mark grateful that Eve is alive. The couple seems to be doing well in spite of the terrible circumstances, but when Cecil enters, Mark demands to see Conquest's body to ensure that he is dead, though his concerns seem to be calmed when his request is fulfilled. They hold a funeral for Rex, in which Robot decides to carry on Rex's legacy, adopting his name for himself. That very same day, Mark and Eve are getting freaky, but during the process of using her powers for the purpose of freaking, we learn that Eve's powers are on the fritz as a result of her reconstructing her body during her death. Meanwhile, Levy reconvenes with his doctors, who essentially state that they will begin cashing in on his debt. The Sequids are also biding their times in the sewers to increase their numbers, because of course they are. It's revealed here that Cecil lied about Conquest's death, as he is recovering, encased in a massive block of tempered steel, which surely will not go wrong. In the hospital, and in spite of his previous hesitance to do so, Mark declares that he will not hesitate to kill anybody who poses a threat to his family or those he loves. It's also here that we get a show-exclusive scene with Darkblood, who's plotting to return his master to power through the use of a, quote, surface dweller with a darkened heart and power that has not been seen in eons. I've got a couple ideas who this surface dweller could be, but nothing's really confirmed, as Darkblood literally isn't in the comics after he gets sent back to Hell. So we're both in for a surprise next season. But this marks the end of season 3 and is currently where the show is caught up to as of the writing of this video. This is also the part where I have to say goodbye to our show-only viewers, as we will now be heading into dangerous spoiler territory. I've got to say though, I'd absolutely recommend giving the comics a read, as they really are great in my opinion. And I think it'll be interesting to see how differently the show handles the plot points and themes when these sort of things get animated. Also, just a heads up, the Invincible fandom is currently going band for band with the JJK fandom to see who can spoil their shit the most for the show onlys. So please be careful if you don't plan on reading it. Anyways, I'm gonna get back to it now, so if you're heading out, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. And we're back to the video. Now it's time to catch up with Nolan and Alan. Nolan gives Alan a crash course in Viltrumite lore, and informs him of the Viltrumites' intent to use Earth as a breeding camp, which recontextualizes Conquest's previous monologue about taking Earth no matter what. Nolan tells Alan that they need to go to the Coalition of Planets immediately, so Alan gathers his things, and the two depart for Telescria. Upon arriving and being caught up, Thetis tasks Nolan and Alan with collecting the weapons he listed in his books, intending on keeping them secret from a potential mole in their system. They locate the asteroid that Nolan had previously abandoned Space Racer on with the intent of him dying. Except Space Racer is one hard bastard to kill, so they have him accompany them to Telescria in an attempt to recruit him for the cause, which seemingly goes well in spite of the confrontation they have. In between missions, Nolan crashes at Alan's place, which is just a little funny. They attempt to capture some Ragnars who had previously been frozen, but the mission goes wrong, so they just keep it in mind for later, deciding to check some more things off of the list, some successful and some not so much, with the next thing on the list being the recruitment of Tech Jacket. However, before they depart, Thetis reveals that the Scourge virus that squad wiped the Viltrumites was actually based off a template of his own DNA, and that they are currently working on an enhanced version of it in case all is lost. Back on the Earth in the wake of Invincible War and Conquest, Mark is helping with the repair efforts when suddenly the best character in all of fiction, Dinosaurus, appears, essentially acting as a dinosaur Ted Kaczynski, but Invincible just mogs him off for the time being, as he has a Jekyll and Hyde Hulk kind of thing going on, reverting back to a human. Invincible almost kills the man, but the Guardians intervene in a timely manner. Even Mark talk a little bit about their feelings about killing people before we get the actual worst panel in the series. Holy fuck. Mark and Eve get back to doing their freelance work, and Oliver's looking a little less purple nowadays, thank god. Oh, and Conquest escapes, because of fucking course he does. Also, Eve discovers that she's pregnant, and she's not exactly too happy about it right now. Mark fodderizes this lady Universa, who is trying to steal all of Earth's power, and gets called in by Cecil of all people, who tells him that the Guardians need his service in Houston, as the Sequids have finally launched their attack. During the fight, Mark gets a little too into it and catches himself sounding like the bad side of his dad. Though the Guardians are working towards an outcome that minimizes casualties, when it comes down to it, Mark kills the final Sequid host, appalling the heroes who witness it, as well as Cecil from abroad. Rex coughs up a final Sequid in the shower and stomps on it, finally ending the Sequids once and for all. Thank fucking god, I don't like them. After a close call where he almost kills Titan, and a talk from Cecil and Eve, he decides that it would be best for him to not kill anymore, as it simply is just too easy, which I'm gonna go ahead and spoil by the way. His I have no enemies thing doesn't last a whole long time. However, this declaration ends the blue suit era, giving us a newer version of the classic yellow suit, as well as the arc known as the Viltrumite War. We also get the first on-screen appearance of Thrag, ordering Conquest to slaughter Mark and his party during their expedition to end the Viltrumite rule. We have a couple of tiny issues to take care of first though. The Flaxons are back again for some reason, this time with a hate boner for Nolan. The heroes on Earth make quick work of them once again, and Robot and Monster Girl follow them into their portal, intent on settling things once and for all. Nolan and Alan recruit Tech Jacket at last, and Nolan sees Debbie for the first time since he left Earth, apologizing to Debbie, though it is pretty understandably not accepted for the time being. Nolan then recruits Oliver for the cause, and Mark and Eve get freaky one last time before he has to depart, unbeknowingly leaving a pregnant Eve alone. After a bit of time aboard the ship, they are attacked by Conquest and a couple of other Viltrumites. The squad makes rather light work of two of their attackers, leaving Mark to deal with Conquest himself after he goes after Oliver. Nailing him down to a nearby planet, Conquest ends up impaling him, though this isn't nearly enough to take down Mark, who chokes the absolute life out of him, refusing to let go, finally ending the brute's life, though it nearly cost him his own. While Mark is recovering, Nolan and Oliver do some bonding, and Alan and Tech Jacket make it to Telescria on schedule, being sent to the front lines of the war effort after the Viltrumites struck first. The Coalition is working to make Ragnars practical in battle, but in the meantime, Battle Beast has agreed to join the war effort for funsies. Mark finally awakens in time for our trio to rejoin the Coalition in Telescria, which is good timing because the Viltrumites stage an attack on Telescria with insider knowledge from a mole. Mark and Oliver destroy a Viltrumite warship, and Thrag and the Viltrumites flee to gather their remaining numbers on Viltrum. The mole is caught, but insists that it's already over. However, Thetis decides to stage a counterattack before their forces can be gathered. Insert hard-ass panel here, let's fucking go. They venture to the tomb that is Viltrum, which I didn't mention before for the sake of any show-onlys who didn't heed my warning, but Viltrum's ring is entirely composed of Viltrumite corpses, which I think is pretty fucking awesome. The gang moves hard and fast, clearing out Viltrumites quickly so they can avoid dealing with getting third party, but tragedy strikes as Mark inadvertently fucks with Thrag, who makes light work of Oliver. Seizing the opportunity though,
status.
orders something that is absolutely nuts. They all charge headfirst into the core of the planet, and with the help of a blast from Space Racer, Viltrum gets shattered into millions of pieces. Thrag, understandably enraged by this, as well as the potential of defeat, tears Thetis' head from his body, ending the life of the first defector of Viltrum. During the ensuing chaos, Alan and Tech Jacket retreat with the help of Space Racer, while Mark and Nolan attempt to fight Thrag, though it is of no use. Thrag makes light work of the two, but decides to spare them as he still considers them Viltrumites, and with their numbers being lower than ever, declares that they specifically will be spared above all else. Mark, Nolan, and Oliver are picked up and delivered to Telescria for hospitalization, and though Mark and Nolan make a rather fast recovery, Oliver is in quite frankly horrible condition, but he seems to be making a relatively fast recovery. Alan is also now the leader of the Coalition of Planets. A report from Tech Jacket confirms something odd. The Viltrumites have basically entirely vanished from the galaxy, which Alan perceives as good news, but Mark realizes the truth before anyone else does. The Viltrumites have gone to Earth. Upon arriving at Earth, there is seemingly no sign of the Viltrumites, but Thrag very quickly makes his presence known. Thrag informs the duo that there are exactly 37 Viltrumites left alive, with some severely injured. So while there might not be a whole lot left, there's still more than enough to lay waste to Earth, and it would low-key be kind of a valid form of retaliation as the others had destroyed Viltrum before. So Thrag offers a truce, seeing that everybody's at a standstill. The Viltrumites will live among the people of Earth as unnoticeably as possible, and will not interfere with any human affairs. They will simply be here to live among them and interbreed with humans over the course of thousands of years to restore the Viltrumite population. And seeing the writing on the wall, Mark and Nolan agree to harbor the Viltrumites. Thrag may be a dictator and a bit of an asshole, but he is a man of his word, swearing that no harm will befall any human by the hand of a Viltrumite. Unfortunate as it may be, Thrag got the last laugh, and Mark kind of sorta lost. It's also worth noting that Mark and Oliver were away from home for about 10 months, as that was the duration of the Viltrumite War. So let's see what the people on Earth have been up to. Debbie and Paul seem to have had a bit of a falling out, which is convenient because Nolan's back on Earth for the time being. I kind of wonder how they're gonna do it in the show though, because like Debbie and Paul have a really good relationship there. Debbie tells Mark to go see Eve, to which he obliges, and Cecil learns at the end of the war from Nolan. Mark makes it to Eve's house, and she's looking a little different these days. A mix of having not used her powers as much and also the stress of having Mark gone. By the way, her looking different isn't a bad thing, just don't be fucking weird. Meanwhile, Cecil calls off the Invincible Reaniman since they won't be needed anymore, and Tech Jacket meets up with his family again, so it seems like it's just a bit of a catch-up period. Oh hey, would you look at that? Nolan and Debbie are back together already. Again, breaking my completely unbiased commentary here, but I honestly really think that this will play out differently, or at least a little slower in the show, as again, I really can't see current Debbie getting back with Nolan. On Telescria, Alan learns of the existence of the Scourge virus from Thetis' will, stating that it's crucial that he must eradicate all Viltrum life forever. Pretty dramatic stuff. Mark switches back to his classic yellow suit instead of the revamped one, and we get one of many sessions where Robert Kirkman is gooning it to Adam Eve. There's a lot of them, but this one's the most like in your face about it. Mark does a little work for his business, Dinosaurus breaks out of prison, and our happy couple meets the Immortal and Kate's kids. But Eve gets emotional and needs to step outside during the evening. After asking what's wrong, we learn that Eve had aborted the baby she was pregnant with before Mark left, as she didn't feel she could properly take care of a child alone. But Mark is a stand-up guy, so all's well that ends well. When they get back home, they learn of Nolan and Debbie's relationship, as well as the fact that Nolan can't stay on Earth. So the new old couple departs for Telescria together. Mark stops this guy who has cool tech from getting away with bonds he stole, so he lets the guy off with a warning, telling him to just sell his tech instead, since he's trying to pay for a wedding. And Mark jokes a little bit about how much reboots suck, which won't come up later. Later, Dinosaurus is tearing up Las Vegas, and while Invincible is fighting him, he low-key makes a couple of valid points. And though Invincible tries to stop his plans of blowing up Las Vegas, he isn't fast enough, with the bombs detonating and turning the entire city into a sheet of glass in the desert. Elsewhere, Powerplex watches news of the devastation and sets his sights on settling business. Mark takes that guy with the cool tech that he stopped earlier to the Pentagon for the sake of having him get paid for his work, to which Cecil points out that it seems that Mark is coming around to his way of thinking. On his way back from the Pentagon, Mark gets stopped by Powerplex, and the two of them have a little clash of morality for a bit before Powerplex finally sees the error in his ways. Though everything seems mostly good on a surface level, it's very clear that Invincible blames himself for Las Vegas. Back at the Pentagon, Robot and Monster Girl are back from the Flaxen dimension, stating that they were gone for about 12 years Flaxen time, though Cecil has a new job for Robot, which is essentially to be in charge of all of the superhero teams that the GDA is working with, to which he accepts because he's a little hurt by whatever caused him and Monster Girl to break up in the Flaxen dimension. Mark is trying to do right by Universa, who was just trying to save her people, even if she was initially trying to go about it violently. So he works with Cecil to get her the energy that her planet needs, and sends her on her way. Meanwhile, Dinosaurus' human form, David Anders, turns himself in, stating that he figured out what causes his transformation: overwhelming indifference, which is kinda hilarious honestly. He just gets fucking bored and the other guy decides to become an eco-terrorist. Mark and Eve seem to be doing well now that everything's settled, but things are rather awkward at the Monster Girl and Rex reunion party, as all of the dudes are being fucking creepy. Though it's here that the group learns of the demise of their relationship, but not why it happened. Afterwards, Eve is, interesting, and Mark gets to see that, love it or hate it, Dinosaurus was actually kinda right about Vegas, as it's actually been turned into a solar panel field like he's planned, which is a realization that Mark has too, so he promptly breaks Dinosaurus out of prison with the intent of helping people without killing anyone, thus turning Mark into a fugitive. Before we can keep up with that, we have to check back with the Coalition of Planets. Oliver is all healed up and no longer purple. Nolan and Debbie arrive after a bunch of weird freaky time that I swear was essential to the plot. But it's okay because we get an actually nice reunion between Debbie and Oliver. Alan learns at the end of the Viltrumite War, and mirroring Mark's logic with Dinosaurus but on a far bigger scale, decides to use the Scourge virus on Earth, which could potentially kill all of humanity as well as the Viltrumites. And though Nolan attempts to stand up to Alan with both reason and strength, he is simply outclassed by Alan physically, who believes Nolan is an exception for Viltrumites, not a rule. Oliver hears out both sides and ends up taking Alan's side, because of fucking course he does. With Nolan being imprisoned for the time being, Alan and Oliver depart for Earth, intent on solving the Viltrumite problem once and for all. Back on Earth, Invincible and Dinosaurus save the world from Omnipotus, which sounds like it would be more important, but it really isn't. And though Cecil tries to talk with Mark shortly after about what he's doing with Dinosaurus, Alan reaches Earth. Mark thinks that it's a friendly visit and goes to meet him in space, but upon learning the actual reason for his visit, he's obviously appalled. And though he tries reasoning with them, they're still intent on making the sacrifice play for what they think is the betterment of the universe. Alan tells Mark that his dad didn't have a chance in fighting him, so he asks what chance he has, which is responded to by fucking Thrag? What? Stating that, for obvious reasons, he's taking Mark's side in this. Alan threatens Thrag with the Scourge virus, but Thrag, ever the diplomat, simply points out the obvious fact that they are still at a standstill, proposing the same truce he made to Mark, but not to the Coalition. Though they're seemingly about to come to an agreement, the Guardians of the Globe pull up and kinda ruin everything. Oliver decides to seize the moment to be a dickhead, and takes it upon himself to unleash the Scourge virus on Earth. Mark stops him, but in the scuffle, the weapon fires off, infecting him directly. Though the planet is no longer at risk of the virus, it immediately starts taking its toll on Mark. Aboard a Viltrumite ship nearby Earth, everyone is gathered, worried about Mark, even Thrag of all people, who vows that the Viltrumites will do their best to save him in order to prove that the Viltrumites are better than the Coalition who did this to him, which works out rather nicely, as they are the only ones who know how to deal with the Scourge virus, even if this is a stronger version of it. Alan recruits Dinosaurus to help with the process of Mark's recovery, to which Thrag reluctantly obliges, ordering everybody else off of the ship. In the lab aboard the Viltrumite ship, they run Mark's DNA to try and synthesize a cure, and they discover something rather odd. Thrag's task of finding Argyll's heir, the original leader of the Viltrumite Empire all the way back at the start of the series' history, has seemingly been accomplished, as Mark is a match, making Nolan the next in line for the throne. Thrag takes the life of the scientist who told him this, stating that nobody can know, pondering what to do in the meantime. Bulletproof tries to take over Invincible's job in his absence, though he isn't allowed to talk to Eve for too long as he tries to rizz her up the first chance he gets. Meanwhile, Oliver and Alan ponder the morality of what they almost did, before deciding to visit Tech Jacket. Back on Thrag's ship, Thrag pays a visit to Mark, who can't pass on the Scourge virus at this point. After monologuing to himself a bit, he attempts to take Mark's life in his sleep, stating that he would be unwilling to yield his position as Grand Regent to a bunch of traitors. My absolute goat, Dinosaurus, intervenes though, threatening to blow up the ship if either of them are killed, demonstrating that he is well within his bounds to do so, even if attacking Thrag nearly gets him killed. Dinosaurus flees with Mark, who talks a little bit with him, before being met by Adam Eve and the rest of the gang, who mistakenly believe that Dinosaurus is keeping him kidnapped. During the confusion, Mark punches Alan, but is horrified to learn that though his super strength has returned rather quickly after his infection, his durability has not, and his arm nearly self-destructs upon impact with Alan. Mark is taken to the Pentagon to recover, which is attacked by some squid fodder, who are dealt with rather quickly by the teams that Robot manages, though there is noticeably some hostility between Monster Girl and Robot. Speaking of, this is finally where we get to learn what happened between the two of them in the Flaxen dimension. Strap your fucking seatbelts, boys. This takes place over the course of 700 plus years of Flaxen time, so I'll try to get through it quickly. After arriving in the Flaxen dimension, they realized they were stranded without the rest of the Guardians, so they surrendered and got captured. Over the next half a millennia, they worked to overthrow the Zaxels, the tyrannical, warmongering royalty in charge of the Flaxen dimension, and during the course of doing so, they developed an extraordinary bond together, having no intention of going back to Earth. Despite an apparent era of peace, things weren't all good, as Rex placed rather harsh punishments on the entire Zaxel family, which may have been fair initially, but ended up resulting in the descendants of the Zaxels being mistreated while working in the mines to barely scrape by. So seeing this, Monster Girl takes it upon herself to free them from their servitude. This causes a fight that makes Rex and Amanda split for decades, before getting back together, and after another another while, the heirs to the Zaxel family attempt to overthrow Rex. He orders Monster Girl to get them, but only after doing that one thing that caused Scare PewDiePie Season 2 to get cancelled all the way back when. Amanda helps overthrow Rex, and when all is said and done, she sleeps with one of the Zaxel heirs, unknowingly getting her pregnant, as the Monster Girl is also actually a monster dude. Don't worry about the logistics of it, it's not important. Amanda realizes that Rex's prejudice was low-key kinda right towards the Zaxels, so she helps him overthrow them once again after breaking him out of prison, before confessing what she did behind closed doors. Rex is so crushed by this that their relationship ends there, and they decide to return to Earth after naming an heir, stating that the Flaxen Dimension will be okay. Okay, we're all caught up, which is good, because that arc takes like 5 50-page chapters in the comics to get explained. Holy fuck. Anyways, back in the present day, the Flaxens are invading London again, with Monster Girl's kid leading the army. During the battle, Krieg intervenes and saves some civilians, which is rather odd, as I thought they were told explicitly to keep their hands out of human affairs. Well, besides having affairs with humans in his case, I guess. After a surprising amount of struggle, because Invincible wasn't there, they subdue her kid, Mon-X, taking him into custody. The next day, Oliver apologizes to Mark for almost killing him, and Alan and Oliver leave for Telescria. Mark and Eve start being freaky shortly after, which is a good time for us to cut away to Thrag, who is currently scolding Krieg for his involvement in London, which starts up a rather interesting dilemma. The Viltrumites are actually falling in love, not just blindly repopulating. We'll come back to that in a second though. Rex and Amanda get back together after apologizing to each other, but secretly we get let in on a little fact. Despite pretending to be shocked that Monster Girl had Flaxen progeny, he was in fact aware of the child's existence, and had actually ordered the execution of all Zaxels, including the unborn child, shortly before returning to Earth with her. Returning to a little dinner he had with his parents before it got interrupted, Bulletproof opens up to his parents that his brother is dead, and that in fact he is Bulletproof. A fact that I neglected to mention during the backstory portion of the video because honestly, I think Bulletproof is boring as shit. But his parents pretty naturally freak out, assuming that Bulletproof killed his brother. In response, his girlfriend, who he has already cheated on before and tried to cheat on again with Eve, kills his mom, before Bulletproof kills his dad who had retaliated. Bulletproof then stages their death as a car accident. As Alan and Oliver arrive back to Telescria, Nolan is freed from prison, and Nolan, Alan, and Oliver depart once again on a mission to see what the Viltrumites are actually scheming. Meanwhile, during a case of Freak Invincible, Mark gets his powers back, so that's cool. Meanwhile, Levy seemingly finally gets free from his debt to the technicians after making their world perfect, so he decides to have his revenge on Invincible, cause that worked so well the first 2 times. Mark dons his blue suit again after a long while, and I'm not sure if you noticed, but not a whole lot of good things happen to Invincible while he's wearing the blue suit, so we should probably be worried. Oh, would you look at that? He's checking up on Dinosaurus for the first time in a while, and oh, would you look at that? He's trying to blow up
Los Angeles.
Mark seemingly disarms the situation, only to learn that this was merely a farce for his actual schemes. And Greenland's gone. That sucks. Invincible has made what can probably be considered to be an awful fucking judgment call by bailing out Dinosaurus, pretty aptly feeling betrayed and starting to fight him. Meanwhile, Thrag calls a meeting with the Viltrumites, telling them to just chill the fuck out as they still don't want any attention. Anyways, back to the main event. The two are dragging their fight throughout Los Angeles, but near the end, and here's the crazy part, after getting an audience, Dinosaurus kills Invincible for like 3 seconds. Yeah, he swapped Invincible with a clone that he had previously made so that he could, quote, kill him in front of the world, thereby freeing him of his obligations and allowing him to commit to helping Dinosaurus full time. However, Invincible talks to him and tries to show him the error of his ways, as despite his facade of doing this purely for the saving of the planet and humanity, this has only slowed it, not solved it. And really, what started as acts to seemingly better the planet became feats to fulfill his monstrous ego. He frees Invincible and asks him to kill him to prevent any further cataclysmic events. Rest in peace, my goat Dinosaurus. You were based as fuck even if you were too advanced for their simple minds. After the deed is done, Cecil comes to him, having tracked his location after the swap. They have a debrief about just how much Mark fucked up, which Cecil can sympathize with, having been in similar positions before with trusting the wrong people. Wink wink, nudge nudge. Thankfully though, the damage in the coming days can mostly be minimized, as Rex previously designed some extra moons for the Earth in case it needed to be kept in low tide. Honestly, I don't really care for that explanation that much, but whatever. Mark asks for the death toll so far, which is currently at 800,000, and is expected to be at least 1 million before the countermeasures can be put in place. Mark pretty obviously expects to be locked away for this, but all Cecil asks in return for Mark's freedom is that he wears an earpiece like the old days, taking orders. He just wants Invincible to be on his retainer in case he really needs him. Though Mark is reluctant, Cecil just points out that he's worked with villains before. Mark doesn't leave his loved ones hanging too long though, as he makes sure they know he's alive shortly after. Afterwards, Mark has a talk with Eve about how he's decided to try and think things through more thoroughly now. so that he doesn't end up having any repeats like he did with Dinosaurus. No more surprises, he says, before Eve promptly proclaims that she is pregnant. It's okay though, because the couple seems pretty happy about it, and Mark will actually be here this time. So everything's cool in spite of the awful canonicity of Viltrumite being strong enough to just phase through a Elsewhere, Thrag is just like, what the fuck is going on? Anissa won't reproduce, Krieg is so into reproducing that he's willing to get detected on Earth for it, and Lucan is a loyal partner who refuses to breed with more than one human so that he doesn't hurt her. These are some of Viltrum's top officers, and they are showing the same signs of what could be considered weakness, much in the same way that Omni-Man did long ago. The Immortal finally decides to be useful again, and Mark and Eve help with the cleanup of Earth post-Greenland. Except Rex kinda wants nothing to do with Mark, which is sorta fair, the guy's supposed to be dead or in prison, but a crucial element that he's forgetting is that Cecil kinda doesn't give a shit about how evil someone may be so long as they can either be reformed or they're currently useful. So he bails him out of the awkward situation. Bulletproof almost gets a rare W by sticking up for Mark until you remember that it's Bulletproof and he was rather weird for Eve earlier. Nonetheless though, it's very important to note just how high the tensions are between Mark and Rex. At the Pentagon, Mark tells Cecil that Eve is pregnant and that Nolan is back on Earth, to which Cecil states that he can help with both. Mark also goes to verify Dinosaurus' corpse, having marked it beforehand to make sure that he wasn't going to have a conquest situation anytime soon, which kind of scares Cecil a little. Mark and Eve have essentially a superhero midwife now, who says that the pregnancy is looking good, but that Eve needs to limit her power usage to none, as it could deplete nutrients that the baby needs. On the moon, Nolan and Debbie live in exile, which is actually pretty tame of a punishment for Nolan's previous crimes on Earth. Cecil just wants Nolan to keep an eye on the Viltrumites just in case. He leaves the happy couple be, but Thrag is a hater-ass bitch, who basically just jumps them the moment that Cecil leaves, feeling threatened by his bloodline. Thrag starts monologuing about Nolan's bloodline and his duty to Argal, but Nolan is too busy mogging. He doesn't care about a legacy or ruling the Viltrumites or usurping Thrag or whatever, but Thrag doesn't want to risk anybody stepping on his legacy, so he commences in beating Nolan's ass. He beats the man within an inch of his life, all while proclaiming himself as the rightful leader of the Viltrumites. But just when it looks like all is lost, Krieg stops Thrag's finishing blow, allowing Nolan to free himself from his grasp. The Viltrumites realize what happened, that Thrag had found the rightful heir to the throne, but wasn't willing to concede it himself. And though Thrag far outclasses Nolan physically, that is not what the Viltrumites care about here, as it wasn't Argal's strength that they were after, but rather his wisdom. They jump Thrag and nearly kill him before Nolan tells him to spare his life, with the Viltrumites bowing before the rightful heir. In a crazy turn of events, Nolan is hastily made the ruler of the Viltrum Empire, but states that he will be doing things differently, focusing more on the people as a whole who had previously been withering to nothing, rather than wasting their people and resources conquering other planets. The Viltrumites hail to their new ruler, with Thrag being imprisoned for the time being. Mark and Eve talk a little bit about it, and it seems to have gone over well, though Mark remarks that sometimes he wishes he could just go back to high school when things were simpler. In spite of this nostalgic sentiment, he tells Eve just how much she means to him, and effectively proposes to her, though he doesn't have a ring yet, which isn't an issue as Eve materializes one for them, so now our happy couple is engaged. We get to catch up a little bit with Angstrom Levy though, who is actually kind of flourishing now that he thinks Mark is dead, though his day is ruined when he receives the good news. In a similar vein, Robot is busy being a hater-ass bitch on one of the artificial moons, and mauls a little bit to Amanda about the credit Invincible is being given. Back to our happy couple after another incident of Freakvincible, they're talking a little bit about the near future of their relationship before Eve realizes that she may have messed up a little by using her powers to make the ring. So they check with their midwife, who says that everything is fine, but tells them to knock that shit off, as further usage could actually severely mess things up for the baby. Eve goes to tell the other happy couple, no, not those bums, about the engagement and pregnancy, and Mark fights a singular Mauler twin. Yeah, I guess he just had a backup somewhere, which weirdly enough makes more sense than the backup shit that Kate had going on. He makes light work of the Mauler, and everything seems to be going good. But when Eve gets back home, Angstrom Levy is back in business, waiting for her arrival. When Mark tries to intervene, Levy sends him through another portal to the same planet that he had abandoned the alternate Marks on. And we get to see none other than Kate Vincible, who has cannibalized his counterparts and furthermore is now trying to eat our Mark. But it's mostly okay, because Eve just kind of powers through his revenge boner just to say that everything will work out in her favor anyways, specifically because she didn't dedicate her life to revenge at the first chance she got. Mark kills Kate Vincible with the help of Mohawk Mark, who is still alive, and shortly after, they're able to escape the dimension through another one of Angstrom's portals. However, Angstrom actually seems affected by Eve's previous monologue, so he apologizes to our Mark, as he was essentially just collateral damage as a direct result of Angstrom's own fuck-ups. He surrenders, offering Mohawk Mark a path to his own dimension, stating that he's willing to accept whatever punishment is fit for his crimes. Not one for charity though, Mohawk Mark drags him to his home dimension with him, seemingly ending the threat of Angstrom once and for all. Mark, however, is still just a tiny bit paranoid, so he employs the help of Rex to help him track down Levy just to be sure. Aboard the Viltrumite ship, Nolan sentences Thrag to exile, as he wants Thrag to witness the Viltrum Empire flourishing without him, and so the tyrant departs, presumably to live a happy life and get settled down with a wife and kids. Mark offhandedly mentions that he's still looking for Angstrom, but those who have played both Red Deads know that our protagonist here may be better off not seeking revenge. Hell, it was kind of the whole point of Eve's speech to Angstrom earlier. Anyways, Nolan gives Alan a Discord call to tell him of his new status, and tell him of Thrag's fate, to which Alan has, mixed reactions. We get to see some genuinely heartwarming stuff with 2 out of 3 of the couples, though the third seems to be in an interesting state. But Nolan descends to Earth to ask Mark if he wants to pull up to the moon, to which he obliges and informs Nolan of the pregnancy. On Telescria, Battlebeast has a mate, and he himself is tasked with hunting and killing Thrag, which we will have to wait to see as Doc Seismic gets transformed into a lava monstrosity. Which we'll also have to wait because we're back on the moon, with even Mark visiting Nolan in Debbie's place, which results in an arm wrestling match that Nolan wins. Amanda goes to see Monax in prison, who tells her that Rex is not what he seems, though it seems that she isn't quite ready for that conversation right now. Rex assembles his team to counter an attack from Doc Seismic and his new accomplice, but the attack is stopped by Anissa? What the fuck? She tries to make a move on Mark, which is super not cool, and hopefully she'll take a hint that he's not interested. Eve tries to convince Mark to let go of his hatred for Angstrom Levy, but it's of no use. Robot contacts him during the night saying that he has completed a portal device and tracked Levy to Mohawk Mark's dimension. One last time, Eve tries to plead with him, saying that she has a bad feeling about this, but the couple gets into a fight over it and she walks off before he leaves. Rex offers to postpone, but Mark is too tunnel visioned on making sure Levy never hurts his family again. They travel to the alternate dimension, noting the large Viltrumite fleet nearby. While discussing where to go first, they are discovered by an alternate conquest, who takes them to Mohawk Mark, this dimension's ruler of the Viltrum Empire. He recognizes Invincible and takes him to Levy, who has a fate that Ted from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream would only be slightly envious of. Levy is barely alive, only remaining so because Mohawk has deemed it to be, wanting to expand his empire into other dimensions. Mohawk goes on a rant about what made the alternate Marks evil, which is just the final straw for Rex, who starts playing the frequency that Viltrumites are weak to, utilizing the tech that he dug out of Mark's head all those years ago. He slaughters everyone in the room in horrific fashion, before laying it out plain and simple to Mark. He has big plans, and Mark just doesn't fit into them. And since he doesn't want to kill him, he figured it'd be better to just strand him here, complimenting him on his time with Dinosaurus, as it was similar to his own future plans in a rather unconventional way that'll make sense soon. Hell, he had even considered Mark as an ally down the line, but seeing Mohawk, a Mark who had tapped into his full conquering potential, it made Rex come to the conclusion that Mark could never be an ally. He'd never allow him to do what must be done. He bids Mark farewell in a rather awkward position. Scrambling for cover, he mimics Mohawk's attire and attitude, playing it rather well before seeking the help of another who may be able to help him escape. Mark recruits this dimension's robot, who never made his transformation into Rex's body, as well as the singular Muller twin left in existence here. Rudy picks up where the previous science team had left off, with Mark using the Muller twins' know-how to make another of his own body for Rudy to copy his conscience into, which would effectively give him control over this universe's Viltrum Empire. After a couple of months, their project is ready. But bad news, the Viltrumites are also impatient as shit, so they attempt to take the building by force to have their ruler back in person. And they've rolled up with what is unironically the peak potential version of Monster Girl, the baby. They cast her towards the hidden base, and holy fuck, look at that actual behemoth. Anyways, it's fine, as the transfer is complete, and thus the two universes bid each other farewell, with both parties obtaining what they were seeking. Mark arrives in his home dimension, and it's here that I must give a sensitivity warning, as this chapter is pretty heavy, so go ahead and skip to the timestamp on screen if the mention of any of this is upsetting for you. Mark returns home to a very visibly pregnant Eve, who is pretty understandably still very mad, but also an Eve who has been told by Rex that he had perished in the other dimension. Still trying to stop Rex, he tries to inquire about his location, but Eve really isn't in any mood to listen right now, as she had almost lost the baby during his 6-month absence, not to mention thinking that he was dead on top of the fight that they had before he left. Mark tries to explain how dire the situation is, but she is having none of it, attempting to break things off before just telling him to leave. Don't worry about that too much though, this basically gets undone like instantly. He reluctantly leaves, telling her that he will make things right. While sorting out his feelings in the clouds, he is stumbled upon by Anissa, who says that she has been looking for him everywhere. Anissa starts mansplaining, yes, I know, about how much she just doesn't want to be with any human on the planet, as she sees them all as far below her. So she sets her eyes on Mark, as he is effectively the next best thing. Mark, of course, shuts her down, but she refuses to take no for an answer. Anissa and Mark fight, but no matter how much he tells her he doesn't want this, she doesn't care, forcing herself onto him anyways. Even amidst all of the violence, bloodshed, tragedy, and heartbreak throughout the course of Invincible's story, this still easily stands as probably the most uncomfortable moment in the entirety of the series for many, myself included. And though a couple of corners of the internet joke about it to try and make it seem like Mark wasn't manly or what have you for not wanting to blindly go at it with every woman he sees, this is probably among the worst things that happened to Invincible, and will end up having consequences throughout the entire remainder of our time left with the series. Anissa flies off, leaving Mark to sit in a pit of disgust, anguish, and despair. A kind farmer stumbles upon Mark, offering him some clothes to pick himself up again. He accepts the offer and flies off to try and warn Cecil of the danger that Rex poses. He tells Cecil of exactly what happened, and while he does believe his story, he needs just a tiny bit more of a push from Mark just to be sure he is in the correct dimension. Rex makes his presence known, and Cecil tries to initiate a deeper dialogue about what happened, but Rex sees that this is truly the time to make his move. He disables Mark with sound and slits Cecil's throat, pinning Cecil's death on Mark, before ensuring that he will not survive by crushing his head. Robot monologues to Mark about how much sorrow he feels over what he had to do, but Mark powers through the frequency and decommissions the drone, but not before he ominously instructs Mark to meet him at his house. Mark wastes no time rushing over to Eve, who Rex was making conversation with prior to interruption, showing off an upgraded suit at last. Villainy be damned, the fit is in fact kinda fire. Robot tries winning over Mark once again, asking for the same trust that he had given to Dinosaurus, and stating that he can make this world perfect, citing his time with the Flaxons as a previous time he had done so. However, Mark is pretty reasonably having none of it. Attempting to stop Rex from hurting Eve, he throws a punch at him, only to be stopped by the same frequencies once more, as Rex's armor, while also being pretty generally stronger, is essentially designed to be anti-Viltrumite, as any blows to it will produce tones that are deadly to their kind. Having already latched onto Eve's leg, he tears it off when Mark tries to power through his onslaught, stating that he knew the only real way to hurt him was through her. Eve deals with the drone, but not before he is able to set the house ablaze. The two of them flee, with Robot being dismayed that the Viltrumites will get involved so soon into his plans. Eve and Mark make it to the Viltrumite ship, where Eve is hospitalized due to her terrible condition, but unfortunately, all across America, Rex's plans finally go into full force, as heroes and villains alike are slaughtered left and right, with none being spared, with his own teams, comrades, and friends being caught in the crossfire of Rex's perfect world. Only a couple of people are lucky enough to make it out alive for now. Aboard the Guardian's artificial moon, Rex is trying to coax Amanda into going along with his plans as he's currently committing them, with this only being realized due to an assassination attempt by Best Tiger. Rex finally drops at least a little bit of his facade when Amanda talks about what her son had said to her, restraining her and kissing her one last time before throwing her out of the airlock of the base, collapsing on the floor out of sadness as this has to be done for the greater good. Anissa rescues Monster Girl from space, and the mayhem continues on Earth. After a little while, Mark and Eve's baby is delivered, and once Eve's surgery goes well, the couple gets to hold their baby together. The two of them acknowledge how fucked up the baby's life might become, and Eve goes to embrace Mark for the first time since he's gotten back, but he flinches, still reeling from not only the pain that Robot has inflicted emotionally, but also now what is a deep-seated trauma for him from Anissa. Monster Girl is also in surgery aboard the Viltrumite ship, and Nolan gets word that one of Rex's drones is on the way to the Viltrumite ship, so he goes to settle business. Rex pulls up to the moon and is immediately surrounded by Viltrumites, but he tries to break the ice by stating that he is relieved that Eve is alive and stable. He lays out his plans of world perfection in front of the group, stating that, though they may be in direct opposition to it, their goals of repopulation still require them to just stand by and let it happen. While talking of world peace, he's simultaneously continuing his conquest elsewhere. Hell, he's not even the one on the moon. His real body is having a meeting with the president. Back on the moon, Rex essentially proposes the very same truce that Thrag had made, with both sides deeming that a fight would be against their best interests, and the two end up deciding to work together for the sake of their own broader goals. Nolan has already agreed to keep the peace for now, only saying that if something changes, then they will react. But for now, he just wants to preserve Viltrumite lives. A couple of the remaining heroes on Earth, and this fuck-ass dog, have a meeting to discuss what they can do in the future to oppose Rex. But little do they know, they've got a regular fucking Benedict Arnold here, as Bulletproof has sold them all out. So they are arrested for the time being, as well as Monster Girl, who the Viltrumites gave up to Rex. Mark pulls up to the Pentagon, with Rex inquiring, "Mark, can we please have a calm discussion?" After a rather long debate, where Robot, despite being very clearly evil, proves that he has already started to change things behind the scenes in a way that is saving lives, starts urging Mark to accept the new, as in spite of his cold and calculated nature, he still doesn't want to kill Mark, telling him that what he does next will determine his future. With no other options, Mark concedes. Robot effectively wins. All the way back in Invincible War, he decided to carry on Rex's name and legacy, but the Rex that stands before us now couldn't be any more different from the Rex that we lost. On a bit of a lighter note, Battle Beast finally arrives on Thraxa, where Thrag has taken refuge. Right as the two are about to engage in combat, Battle Beast's partner unleashes Ragnar's upon the arena, being ordered to ensure Thrag's demise above all else. Battle Beast, though, wants the fight to be even and accepts no such advantages, helping Thrag kill the beasts. When the dust is settled, Thrag has a pretty nasty wound on his stomach, so still accepting no advantages, Battle Beast wounds himself in the same spot, before the two start a battle that will take literal in-universe days to finish. All the while, Thrag's evil schemes are revealed, essentially using Thraxa as a way to assemble a Viltrumite army as fast as can possibly be. Seeing the culmination of consequences, both good and bad, that have occurred in the wake of Rex's silent rule, Mark and Eve decide to move off of Earth and to Telescria. Mark says goodbye to everyone he needs to, calls the Immortal a bum one last time for the road, and the two of them depart for better places, deciding to name their daughter Terra, a little piece of their own Earth. They arrive on Telescria and greet their friends, including Oliver, who is noticeably older and finally not wearing that fuck-ass outfit. He honestly looks so much better without the hair too. It's just a really good change in my opinion. Mark and Eve have dinner with Oliver and his cockroach girlfriend, maybe bug girlfriends just run in the family. The two of them actually feel really romantic and try to get freaky, but Mark pushes himself away, still feeling uncomfortable with that sort of stuff from Anissa. He opens up to Eve about what happened, and though she is supportive, she doesn't really have a response right away. She goes to check on Terra, who isn't breathing, so they rush her to a doctor, but don't worry, she ends up being okay. Alan calls Mark in to ask if he would be comfortable being an investigator for him, to which he agrees, so long as he wouldn't be risking life or death. Mark and Eve talk a little bit more about what happened with Anissa, and Eve is actually really supportive. Good shit, Invincible, you love to see it. Anyways, Alan walks in shortly after and kinda just immediately walks back on promising that Mark wouldn't be risking his life, as he asks if he'd be okay with finishing off Thrag should he survive his battle. Speaking of, several days after the fight began, Thrag eventually emerges victorious over Battle Beast in a fight that was more or less even the entire time, and also was a fight that took place across the entire fucking planet. That's pretty awesome. Battle Beast's lover attempts to sacrifice herself too, but Space Racer knocks her out before fleeing from the planet, though their ship gets destroyed. Shortly after, Thrag flees from the planet on a ship with all of his children, fashioning himself a coat made from Battle Beast after he recovers from the battle. Mark and Oliver investigate Thraxa, but they find no trace of him. Space Racer and Thresha, Beast's lover, are rescued from being frozen in space, and Mark eventually just goes back home. We get a rather calmer episode of Freakvincible, and Mark wakes up before Eve, deciding to spend some quality time with Terra, and when Eve wakes up, they just spend a nice day together at the park. Well, relatively nice when you consider that it's an alien planet. Back on Earth, Bulletproof is continuing his L streak by selling out the Immortal and his family to Robot's regime, though this seems to have been a part of the Immortal's plans, as he detonates his restraints, disfiguring Bulletproof. He frees all of his friends at the cost of being bisected. Monster Girl teams up with her son, though there's an absolutely monstrous horde of robots. D.A. Sinclair, however, in a moment of extreme heroism, sends the Reanimant as reinforcements to the heroes, blowing his cover as a rebel. He helps them escape by activating the White Room technology throughout the Pentagon, before escaping in a rocket before he receives any punishment. The rebels regroup in hiding, and while they're debating the effectiveness of Rex's philosophy, the man of the hour steps into the room, and offers to take in any hero who wishes to switch sides, with about half of the group departing. Rex promises not to hunt those who didn't switch sides so long as they don't come after him first, stating that one way or another, they will all end up seeing his side. Back on Telescria, Mark and Oliver have been continuing their investigations as planned, doing mostly low-level crime fighting on the planet, and Mark and Eve are still becoming accustomed to alien life, some easier than others. Though Thrag has been moving throughout the galaxy, attempting to avoid Coalition attention, he has still been discovered, so Alan asks Mark and Oliver to go on a mission to take him down once and for all, stating that Space Racer is keeping tabs on him in the meantime, which I'm sure is going absolutely stellar. Mark tells Eve to spend the day out, as she has been getting sick of being home constantly, before deciding to spend the day with Terra. When Eve gets back, we get one last bit of Freakvincible for the time being, before Mark bids her and Alan farewell, heading on their mission at last. Upon arriving on the planet, there is no sign of Thrag. It's like he was never there to begin with. The Coalition starts searching the planet, and during their investigations, Mark stumbles upon a cave, which he asks Oliver to inquire about. However, not being one for waiting for answers, he ventures into the cave before he can get an answer about it, being dragged deeper and deeper into the cave until he stumbles upon a radiant blue light in the form of some plant organism. The plant organism doesn't get explained, try not to get too hung up about it. He touches the light and gets enveloped by it, taking us back to...
Wait, what the fuck? What's going on? I'm scared!
I wasn't lying to you when I said that Mark shitting at the start of the series was an important plot point. We are now effectively at the start of the story again, kicking off the highly divisive reboot arc, which, spoilers, I kinda like it a lot. I get why people don't, especially after the arc is over, but to each their own. Mark is naturally pretty concerned about starting his hero journey over, so he seeks the help of Eve, who kidnaps him and takes him to the Teen Team's headquarters. They interrogate him, but determine that he is legitimately from the future. Rudy, warns him to save lives where he knows he can, but also tells him to be careful so as to not fuck up the future too much. He spends a couple of weeks speedrunning his hero career, preventing many of the life or death situations that he had gotten himself into during his first go. He tries to remain undetected by Nolan, but is discovered when he's stopping the Flaxen invasion. When he's talking to Nolan about his powers later, he actually gets him to open up about himself a pretty good amount. However, he tries to prevent Nolan's takeover attempt of Earth, which starts a bit of a fight between the two. Mark leads Nolan to the Guardian headquarters, and even with a head start, the Immortal gets fodderized, cause go figure. But it's okay, because the actual cooler Guardians take care of him with some foresight from Invincible. After the fight, he wins the favor of Cecil and talks with Nolan about his plans to take over the Earth, to which Nolan says that he was right about him, and his actual takeover attempt would have been an act that he would have regretted for the rest of his life, thanking Mark for stopping him. When Alan eventually shows up, Mark tells him of Nolan's existence, so Nolan leaves to join the Coalition. Mark continues superheroing with future knowledge, but misses Eve the whole time, basically having to be in the Sneeko chair because Eve is still with Rex at this point. In his room, he cries to himself, missing the life that he was ripped away from, when the plant organism appears once more before Mark, trying to get Mark to see the good that he has done with his new existence, to which Mark sort of agrees. However, the organism offers Mark two paths. One where he can stay in the past and correct the deaths of so many, or one where he can return to his original time. Mark chooses to return to his wife and daughter. The creature sends him back, proclaiming that he has doomed this new universe, before Mark appears at the bottom of the cave. He flies up and finds the remains of the Coalition's warships, before deciding to return to Telestria. He finds Eve and tries to explain everything to her, and though she understands, something seems off. He asks to see Terra and is horrified to see that she is considerably older. In fact, 5 years passed during the couple of weeks he had spent in the alternate timeline, and Reboot was kinda more or less just an excuse to have a time skip, which some people understandably don't care for that much, but I don't really mind. Oh, and the art style changes dramatically. Like, dramatically. Which honestly, I prefer the old one, but this one isn't as bad as everybody says it is, and we have more pressing matters. Mark is effectively left to put his life back together. Alan is thrilled to see Mark and tries to have him rejoin the effort against Thrag, but Mark and Eve have already agreed that they just want to spend some time off-world. Before they get to do so, Mark catches up with Oliver, who has kids now and is basically just a mini Nolan in appearance. The two have a nice little moment of bonding, but it's clear how bizarre the situation is for Mark. They arrive at their new place and all seems well, but behind closed doors, Oliver is in contact with Thrag, going undercover for the Coalition, which I'm sure will end well. He reassures him that Mark may never get involved in whatever Thrag is planning. During the last 5 years, his Thraxan Viltrumite army has had time to mature greatly, as they are basically set for an attack upon the Coalition. After taking over another Coalition planet, Thrag sets his sights on Mark, wanting to send a message and get revenge. While Mark is spending time with Terra, Alan attempts to quell an insurrection at the Coalition headquarters, but the offender attempts to take Alan out with him, turning him into curly mouthwashing or that one Baki panel, take your pick. On Earth, Nolan is working for Rex, helping him stop an attack by the technicians that had been set up like 90 chapters ago, which by the way we don't get to see and I'm low-key kinda salty about. The gang visits Alan in the hospital and Eve's weird alien ex tries being freaky, so Eve knocks him out. Alan recovers and Mark sees his dad for the first time since he got back, along with Anissa, who most of them pretty reasonably crash out at. Speaking of, Anissa's previous assault was in fact unfortunately successful at producing a kid, who she names Marky because she just doesn't know subtlety, I guess. Later, Mark meets with Rex for the first time in a while, who, in spite of the recent Technician War, has otherwise achieved magnificent results on paper in his goals of creating true world peace. Though Nolan and Mark disagree heavily about their opinions on him, so Mark, Eve, and Terra return to their new home. Oliver continues his Discord calls with Thrag, hoping to get to meet him in person, with Thrag himself continuing to train his army of children. After a training session, he sends his two favorite children to kill Mark. Thrag, seeing the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, tells Oliver that he is going to kill Mark, tasking him with doing nothing to prove his loyalty to the new Viltrumite Empire. The happy family is attacked suddenly by the duo, and during the fight, Terra realizes that she has her father's powers, but at a rather bad time, as Thrag himself decides to make an appearance, almost killing Terra. However, Oliver didn't listen to his task, and has arrived to the planet as well, attempting to take Thrag in a one-on-one battle, though this unfortunately proves fatal for him. Mark pulls up with Thrag's kid's neck in his hands, asking for Terra's safety in exchange for his son's. Thrag tries to call his bluff, but Mark was in fact not bluffing. Thrag and his remaining child, Ursel, absolutely brutalize the couple, before leaving them for dead as punishment for Viltrum's destruction. Unfortunately for them though, after they depart, Eve gets full access to her powers again, being in a near-death scenario, fixing Terra's leg and restoring and upgrading the parents' bodies once more, though Oliver was far too gone to be saved. A funeral is held for Oliver, with a fight breaking out between Mark and Alan over whether or not Alan was responsible for his death. Though Eve breaks it up, as everybody involved in the fight basically just had a lot of pent-up grief that they needed to get out. Mark and Eve set their resolve towards killing Thrag and ending things once and for all, but for real this time. Trying to take care of all of their business before they set their sights on the fight, Mark and Eve finally get married, which is pretty cool. Alan confesses to his lover that he kinda sorta absolutely was responsible for getting Oliver killed. On a different planet, Thrag finds Ursel hiding in a cave that her brother was fond of, and it's here that we get to see that there are already cracks in Thrag's philosophy of strength above all, as the both of them are struggling with love, even if Thrag is trying desperately to repress it. Alan confesses his sins to Mark and apologizes for getting Oliver killed, which goes about as well as one could hope. The Coalition joins Mark and Eve's fight against Thrag's forces. Mark tries to recruit Nolan and the Viltrumites, but Nolan is hesitant at first, feeling responsible for everything that has transpired, as he was the one who let Thrag go in the first place. But Mark urges him to do the right thing, and he agrees to join the fight. Mark and Eve don their original costumes for the first time in actual years. Well, I guess not really in Mark's case, but fuck you. Before leaving Tara and Debbie's care and heading for battle. At last, the forces are together, and Mark has a rather unconventional plan. He wants to lead Thrag to Earth. The group starts liberating planets conquered by Thrag one by one, with Space Racer being tasked with finding their central base. Meanwhile, Ursula seems to be building up resentment for Thrag after repeated instances of mistreatment towards her brothers and sisters. At last, they end up on a planet that Thrag himself is on, sending all of his progeny out Invincible. Though the actual Coalition forces struggle with the sheer numbers, the Viltrumites who are fighting the forces kinda no-diff them, with them apparently having the structural integrity of a paper straw. Ursula begs Thrag to consider how many of her siblings are dying, but he simply tells her that if she feels any sympathy for the dead, then she would be better off joining them. Our characters retreat, leading Thrag's army to Earth as planned. As their forces approach Earth, Nolan calls upon the Viltrumites on Earth to join the cause, and it seems that most, if not all of them, respond in spite of their family obligations. And in one of the hardest moves in all of Invincible, Alan stages the battlefield of this final battle to take place next to the sun, for the proposed sake of hiding their forces, but let's just be honest, it fucking looks cool. Thrag rides into battle atop some Ragnars, and Rex, ever the opportunist, uses the absence of the Viltrumite adults on Earth to seize the Viltrumite children. He leaves Bulletproof in charge in the meantime, trying to help stop the imminent threat to Earth before it can reach the planet, though it means that he will be out of range to control any drones he has on Earth. Each side's forces meet, with Thrag throwing around Ragnars like weapons. His ropes are cut, and during a clash, Nolan attempts to take Thrag on one-on-one, correcting the mistake he made all those years ago. Though Nolan's intentions are noble, Thrag simply far outclasses him physically, making rather light work of him, before making the move that decommissions Nolan from the fight, essentially Tojiing him. Mark sees this and blitzes through the crowd that he was previously occupied with, engaging Thrag just as Rex arrives to the battle, who pulls up in this absolute behemoth of a suit. Eve collects Nolan in hopes of saving his life, but Anissa sees that she is in danger and takes what could be a lethal blow for her. She tries to make the sacrifice play, attempting to have Eve apologize to Mark for her, as her time on Earth has vastly changed her for the better, it seems. During Mark and Thrag's fight, he starts using his children as expendable projectiles, but Mark tackles Thrag towards the sun. Ursula, having witnessed the sacrifices that the Viltrumites have made for each other, as well as her father's callous behavior towards her siblings, decides to call on her siblings to surrender, as she recognizes that Thrag no longer fights for the interests of them, but rather only out of his own selfish intent. Back with Mark and Thrag, the two of them fight their hardest even as the sun starts to burn up their very clothing. Mark asks why Thrag even fights now, as he had previously declared the Viltrumite Empire dead, to which Thrag responds that he is here to take revenge, for the very people he spent his life working towards finding were also the ones who obliterated his home planet. He attempts to continue, but the two of them are blasted by a solar flare. Thrag attempts to flee the sun in order to end the lives of Mark's allies, but Mark drags him back down, intent on ending him no matter the cost to himself. Thrag hurls him to the surface of the sun, but he flies back, being scorched, but still full of fight. He grabs Thrag and dives below the surface of the sun, with both men emerging badly burned, and no longer able to communicate due to their transmitters being fried. Mark realizes right here and now, though, that he has already won. He knows that Thrag, a man who is fighting simply for revenge, is fighting for nothing, as Mark is fighting for the sake of not only his family and his people, but also Thrag's family and people, as he wants all of them to live peacefully. Nolan's exiling of Thrag may have appeared to be a mistake, but that exact move showed what their people could be. Thrag was so focused on strength at the cost of everything else that he never even saw the other Viltrumites' potential. As he is thinking to himself, Robot sends Mark a suit of armor to give him just the extra bit of time that he may need against Thrag. Because Thrag committed to fighting only for himself, not only does he not have anybody who is willing to help him in his darkest hour, but Mark is being helped by what can be considered to be his greatest enemy. Thrag's archaic ways push his people to the brink of extinction, and Mark, who he deemed to be weak for his compassion, has even his most bitter of enemies on his side when he needs it. His suit of armor melts around him as he continues to pummel Thrag, and to finish him off, he pins him to the surface of the sun, finally ending the tyrant's reign of terror. Mark accepts that he will probably die here as well, but Alan comes to his rescue as Thrag is cremated alive. Mark is immediately put into intensive care for the wounds he received on the sun. Alan pardons Ursula from her imprisonment, as she had a large part in the end of this war. Debbie and Tara depart for Earth upon learning of Nolan's condition, and after presumably a couple of days pass, Mark is well enough to move around the ship and goes to see Nolan, who is in a rather sorry state. Nolan welcomes him in, with the two of them realizing that he is going to die. Nolan requests that Mark takes over as the leader of the Viltrumites, and though Mark initially doesn't want to, Nolan tells him that he could build an incredible world for his daughter, stating that it has to be him who is in charge, as it was his compassion that changed him for the better, and it's through said compassion that he can change the rest of the Viltrumites for the better too. Mark tries to plead with him, but it's too late. Nolan passes peacefully in his son's presence, with Debbie and Tara arriving shortly after. A little bit later, Mark is more adequately healed and goes to be around Tara, talking to her in her sleep similarly to how he did when she was just born. Just as he's about to wake her, Eve alerts him of Rex's presence as he forms a blockade preventing the Viltrumite ship from reaching Earth. Rex, ever the proactive one, informs Mark of the fact that he's intending to use the Viltrumite's children to turn his own army against him, so Mark flies down to Earth himself to recruit some help. While he's busy doing so, Rex broadcasts the same information to the Viltrumites aboard the ship, and, fearing the safety of their own children, they unfortunately start to comply. In the meantime, Eve recruits Ursula and her siblings to help get them to Earth. Mark recruits the Immortal, as well as the remaining heroes on the planet to the cause, and hey, Tech Jacket's here. The two armies meet at the Pentagon, and though the manipulated Viltrumites attempt to get their children back through Mark, he simply auras them off and tells them to play along with his plans. Using Tech Jacket as a battering ram, they breach the building, working their way closer and closer to the Viltrumite children. When the heroes are surrounded, Rex accidentally reveals his position to Monster Girl, who promptly points him out. Mark wastes no time singling him out and taking him well outside of Earth's orbit faster than his drones can catch up, leaving him effectively stranded. Though Mark brought Robot all the way up here to kill him, he hesitates still, even after all this time. As much as it may be painful to acknowledge, he can't deny just how much of a difference Robot has made in the world, though he is simply far too evil to consider going about things in a way that doesn't leave him in control of every variable. Deep down, Rex is right, but he recognizes that Mark is trying to find a way to keep all the good that he has done while also losing the bad he could do, with Mark seemingly figuring out just that, punching a hole through him, ending his chokehold on Earth. Back at the Pentagon, Mark brings the Immortal in for a proposal, to lead the Earth in his absence, keeping the people's best interests in mind and maintaining the peace that Rex established. But having seen how badly this could go with something like King Immortal, and considering the Immortal's overall well-being, he has set aside Rex's brain, all of his ideas, all of his plans, all the good that he wants to do in one location. But it all has to go through the filter that is the Immortal, only allowing Rex to send out verbal commands, effectively cutting him off from any of his drones just in case there are any still hidden. Seeing the help that he will have, the Immortal agrees to this plan, presumably more enthusiastically than his future variant. At Mark's induction ceremony, every Viltrumite alive, whether it be those who lived under Nolan or Thrag, bows their head to their new emperor out of respect. Mark meets his mom at Nolan's grave, but this time it's one that is dedicated to him entirely, not the one that Cecil had made in his absence all the way back when. They talk a bit about how much time has flown by, and no matter how much has changed, Debbie knows that Nolan would be proud of him. Mark talks with Alan before he departs to Telescria, stating that though he sees the good in what came of it, the relationship will never be the same as a result of Alan's role in Oliver's death, which Alan understands and accepts. Mark reassures Alan that so long as their goals align and it doesn't endanger the Viltrumites, he will still always come to the aid of the Coalition of Planets. While talking about plans for the future, Mark receives a call from the Immortal, who informs him that Marky, Anissa's son, is in trouble. Mark goes to meet the boy, informing him that he's his father, which makes him faint, but it's okay, cause Eve's got him. Meanwhile, on the ground level, the Maulers have devoted themselves to good, surprising Invincible. Mark reconvenes with Marky later, and gives him a crash course on the history of Viltrumites, as well as his own path to becoming the Emperor. He apologizes for having not been there for him, telling him that this isn't a goodbye, as he will be coming back to Earth from time to time, which the kid barely understands at this point. After a goodbye from his mom and some reassurance that Marky will be okay, he departs from Earth with the other Viltrumites, as he feels it would be better to avoid the potential world-changing consequences that having a bunch of young Viltrumites on Earth would bring, intent on bettering the universe with the help of the Viltrum Empire. Fast forward a couple of years, and Debbie takes Marky to meet Art, gifting him a costume that is very similar to the one his dad wore, before he does a little crime stopping of his own. During this heroic moment, we learn that Darkwing 2 is fucking alive somehow, as I guess he survived his encounter with that alternate Invincible during the Invincible War. Marky then goes to visit Nolan's grave in what is a rather nice moment. Levy's son arrives in Mark's home universe because better late than never, I guess. Rex tries to talk with Amanda as he is extremely lonely, but at this point, she just tells him that he is living in the world that he wanted and that it's on him to deal with it. Over the coming years, we get a montage of Tara growing up, complete with proof that Mark kept good on his word and came back to Earth from time to time. Tara eventually becomes a planetary superhero, sporting an outfit similar to her father's original one. Even more time later, a noticeably aged Mark addresses his people about why he has chosen not to adorn his face with a mustache, stating that he associates it with the old ways of Viltrum, and that his clean face is a way to honor the newfound peace that Viltrum has adopted. Alan later starts a war with Mark over the fact that he is simply too good at peace, and it's making the Coalition of Planets dissolve. But when all is said and done, Mark comes out on top, promising to continue changing things for the better, as the Coalition had seemingly become parasitic near its end, though Mark still seemingly has some friendly rapport with Alan. Tara sat out on the war, viewing it as wrong, which has caused some tension between her and her father, but none of that matters right now as Eve has neared the end of her life. However, with her loved ones gathered, her body reforms itself once again, making her effectively immortal, which is pretty cool. We get a little montage of the Viltrum Empire doing good for the universe, except those outfits are a little interesting looking, but whatever. Later, Marky confronts his dad about leaving Earth for good, to which he apologizes for and accepts, offering to make up for the time they missed together. At last, half a millennia after he left Earth, we see Mark and Eve standing together at their home, with Tara relaxing nearby. Eve points out that Mark has done it. He accomplished everything his dad asked of him, turning the Viltrumites into an unwavering force for good. Mark closes out the series by saying, "I've been thinking a lot about the past lately, and one thing keeps coming back up. There's so many things that remind me of something my father once said to me. It was during our big fight. He looked down at me and said, 'What will you have after 500 years?'" And with that, we have the end of Invincible. Was it always perfect? No, there are a couple of very fair things to criticize it for. But for me personally, I absolutely loved every bit of it. I remember when I had read it for the first time about a year ago after season 2 had ended. I speedran reading it in the course of about 3 days. I just could not put the fucking thing down. Invincible is my favorite comic book series that I've ever read, and I'm very excited to see where the future of it is headed, and how things will play out differently down the line as the series continues to be developed as a show. But nonetheless, thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like or subscribe, as it took a shit ton of time and effort to make, and any support means the world to me. If you're interested in keeping up to date with the channel, make sure to join our Discord server in the link in the description below. Otherwise, make sure to stay safe and have a great rest of your day. Bye bye!